we'll cover in more detail now the quick fixes part and the web-based editing after that. So I will not look only into new additions in 17, but also give you an overview of quick fixes in oXygen in general. So the quick fixes support, then the support for XSLT quick fixes, then XML validated with the XML schema and relax-ng, and the Schematron quick fixes part, which is the more interesting part, I think. So I think all this started a couple of years ago at XML Prague when Nico, and I have difficulty pronouncing his first last name, Kuchauer, approached me before XML Prague asking, look, I have this idea to have Schematron quick fixes, and are you interested to have that in oXygen? I said, well, I don't know, it's maybe. And then we met at XML Prague, and we stayed together during lunch, and we discussed about this, and it was an interesting idea, but we didn't have too much functionality in oXygen to be able to provide that. So then we started to implement quick fixes as a generic functionality and provide them for XSLT. That was the first language that we provided quick fixes for, and then we extended that to XML validated with XML schema and relax-ng, and finally also to Schematron quick fixes. So Alex already covered part of what quick fixes are, right? So every one of us probably are using spell checkers, and you will not imagine a spell checker giving you just something that this word is incorrect. You will say, okay. So spell checkers give you those proposals with possible replacements for that word. And those are the quick fixes, basically, right? So because you can just select one to fix that that problem. And why we need quick fixes? Because even, especially if you have a generic error message, it will be difficult to understand by some users, right? So they will not know how to fix that problem, or even if they understand what to do, doing that manually takes a lot of time, and being a manual process, you may have errors. So another advantage, let's say, is that you eliminate these opportunities to introduce errors in your content. So what we can do is there are two types of proposals. So either it's a generic error reported by validation with the XSLT engine in case of XSLT quick fixes. So Saxon will tell you, for instance, that a template is not found. So you call a template or a function, and there's no function with that name or template with that name. So you get an error, and you can analyze some types of errors and decide, okay, for this type of error, I can provide this fix, right? So you identify types of errors, and then look at the actual error, because that may refer to a name, a template name, and dynamically create the fix to create a template with that name, for instance. Examples here are also like required elements are missing, so add those elements, or here's an attribute that should not be here, remove that attribute. in general, you can have multiple solutions for or multiple proposals to solve an error, right? So I don't know, maybe you can delete that reference. So if you have a reference to something that does not exist, either you create that or you can delete the reference, right? So there may be different options to actually fix the error. So there are these proposals generated automatically, or in case of Schematron, the error message is something that the Schematron developer writes. So you cannot identify a generic error message in Schematron and provide fixes. So that's why we need a way in Schematron to actually write also the fixes, like small scripts that annotate the error, that are linked to that error, that will be applied on the document to correct that problem. One or more such scripts. So either you generate them automatically or you can write your own fixes with if you use Schematron. This is how they are presented in oXygen. It's the usual way quick fixes are presented in development environments like Eclipse or other environments. So you get a marker on that line where you have the problem, and when you click on that marker or you can trigger this also with the shortcut, then you get a drop down with some information describing the problem, and then like here the attribute platforms is not allowed here, and then possible solutions, remove that attribute, or here there's an external link that does not start with HTTP or HTTPS, and to solve that I have two options to put that as an HTTP or HTTPS. So this way comes from the development tools, basically. We are also thinking to see if for the author, maybe there is a better way to show these quick fixes in the user interface. I don't know, maybe along the lines of the autocorrect part that Alex showed after that we built after the 17 release, right? With a drop down that is placed in place there, and the user can choose. I don't know. We will explore to see if there is a better way to do that. So applying a quick fix is just selecting the alternative you want, if there are more, and that's it. So as I said, after that discussion in Prague, we started to work on building quick fixes support in oXygen, and the first step was to build a number of basic actions that change the document, again in a safe mode, that preserving everything in the document. So you need to refer to some location in the document, maybe with an XPath expression, identify that location, and then you need to delete, insert, do different small operations on the document, but preserving the lexical structure of the document, because when you apply a change, you don't want the entire document reformatted or things like that. So we implemented this set of basic actions for the text page and for the author page. Also, we have this implemented like this because we don't want to save the file on disk, apply the changes, and then reload the file. So this does not work necessarily on disk. We want the file to stay and have the entire undo history available. So then when you apply a fix and undo, you get back to the previous state and redo it, and you come back here. So there is still some work probably to implement quick fixes in the diagram mode for XML schema, for instance, if we want that to be available there. And now, if we look at XSLT quick fixes, they are quite useful when you develop XSLT quickly, and then let's say you write a template, you plan to create a template that does something, then you just write that, maybe add also the parameters, and then invoke the quick fix to create the template with the parameters automatically for you. So it not only you can use quick fixes not only to fix problems in the development part, but also to speed up the development process, let's say, because you don't need to write the template first and then call it. You are in some place where you think, oh, this code, I should put that in a name template. So just say call template, do something, add parameters, and then invoke the quick template to create that. When you refer to a template, it's also possible that you misspell the name of that template, right? So some of the fixes are to call an actual template with a similar name. So we can compute a cost of changing one name to the other, and if they are similar enough, they appear as proposals. Missing functions, undeclared variables and parameters. Yeah, so I noted also here that it's not only a way to solve problems, but it's also a way to speed up development. So let me see if I have here an XSLT file. And here we have a, let's make it bigger. So we have this node template exists with this name, right? Create, and in this case probably it's a misspelled RI. It's with one R, right? So it's probably a misspelling. So so I get an option to create that or to change the reference to a similarly named template, right? So I can choose that. Here it's let's see. Here we have an undeclared variable. So we can create a global variable, a local variable. So there are multiple options presented. Let me see if we have something else here. And in this case, it's also an example that creates a function. So with two parameters. So if we select the first option, then we get a function created with those two parameters taken from the code. So now moving on, after we implemented this for XSLT, we started to look at implementing quick. So we implemented only text mode actions, implemented quick fixes for XSLT, and then we looked into when we validate XML with XML schema first. And then in 17 we added also support for when we validate XML with RelaxNG. And next we plan to add also support when we validate XML with DTDs. So all this basically means looking at the error messages reported by the validation engines, identifying the ones that can be solved automatically, and then intercepting them and providing the one or more quick fixes for each. examples of XSD validation errors that are corrected are for cases where the required attribute is missing, so we can add that attribute, an invalid element, so we can remove that, or if you refer an invalid ID, then I think we can propose some similar values as a replacement. Similar for RelaxNG, and of course it really doesn't matter what schema language you have, you get the same errors. The XML and compact syntax for RelaxNG are basically just a way of writing the schema, but the engine works in the same way with both, so you get the same type of errors and they are intercepted in the same way, and we provide the same one other benefit is that when you see how the problem can be solved, sometimes it may help also understanding what was the problem in the first place, right? So if you don't understand the problem only from the message, when you see a solution or more solutions to that, it may help also understanding that problem. Let me see. So in this XHTML file, I think this is validated with an XML schema in this case. Here we have an image without an alternate alt attribute, which is declared as required in the schema. So you trigger this action, and being in the outer mode, we show this attribute editing dialog, so the alt attribute is added, and then you can also specify the values for that, the value for that. In this case, it's a paragraph within in a list, in an unordered list, where an li is expected. So we have removed invalid paragraph here. Here we have background color set on a table, so an invalid attribute which can be removed. And for RelaxNG, I think we have, I think Alex already showed you this example of a dogbook document with the number of errors that can be corrected. Here it is a reference that has an invalid. I think we need to go to the text mode. So this this ID reference is not present in the document, and we get two other IDs that are actually defined in the document to replace that one. So now we go back to, we finally arrived to the Schematron part, and this links back to my previous session on guided authoring, right? When it's important to communicate to the user how they should do things, what they can do. So I mentioned then that Schematron allows you to control the error messages. Now the Schematron Quick Fixes allows you to also propose one or more actions to fix the problem to the user. So I've been working also on an intelligent style guide that can contain built-in not only the prose of what you expect in your documents, but we can embed also information that can be used to generate Schematron rules, right? So you can enforce those rules, not only write about them. And now with and here are a number of examples, like bold not allowed in title, as Alex presented. This was an intermediary step in the refactoring part, right, when the title remained with bold content. An external link should have a format attribute, or do not end the list item with semicolons. The table structure maybe can be checked to see if you have the same number of columns on each row, and so on. So you may decide not to use order list, only unordered list in your content, and so on. So these are business rules because they depend on actually on the project. Schematron can be used for enforcing these business rules, or also for filling the gap when the specification says something, but the RelaxNG or XML schema or DTD that are used to define the structure of the document cannot actually specify those rules. So there are these are the main points where Schematron can be used. So now we do not only enforce those rules showing an error, but we can also provide a way to fix them automatically. So the users will be able to just select the right fix. So for instance, in this case, we can remove the bold element or add a format attribute, remove semicolon, or replace that with full stop. So different options can be provided. If there are no a table does not have the correct number of columns, then we can add the missing cells to those rows that do not have enough columns. And if we identify an ordered list, we can make it unordered, for instance. And I think we have also an example here. With all these in Schematron, we also support different levels of reporting errors. Using the role attribute, we can control, say, this is a warning, or this is an error, a fatal error, or just an info. In this case, we show, let's say, a warning for the bold element is not allowed in title, but now a user will, especially in this visual editing mode, they need to go and find how do I remove that bold element, right? While now it's just says remove bold, and that's fixed. They just select the fix, right? Here is an example that shows comments are not allowed in title, delete comments. So it's just an example to show that you can act not only on the element structures, but also on comments or other on text and so on. In this case, we have a missing format attribute, so we can select this and say HTML, for instance. And this is an example with the missing with the table structure where we have some missing cells. So we can select add enough columns to the table, cells to the table, and we get those cells added. And here is an example that converts this ordered list to unordered list. What do we have here? And here it's a list with just one element, right? So a quick fix for this is to convert that to plain text or add a new list item, right? So let's say we put that as text. So as I mentioned initially, this Schematron Quick Fix idea was initially started by Nico. I forgot again. Kutrauer?
No.
Okay. From data to type. He also developed a project called Escali and a plugin for oXygen that performs quick fixes with Escali on a document in oXygen, right? So that's separate from our quick fixes support. Let's say it uses this Escali engine directly. And I think the document needs to be saved on disk because this will work on disk. We started a couple of years ago a W3C community group. So W3C has this formal process for specifications. But if you are a member of W3C, you can also start a community group. And then it's less informal, so people can join, they can discuss, and at some point we can end up with some deliverable or something that can be proposed, maybe at least for a note, W3C note, which is I don't think we are ready to go through all that difficult process for standardization, but the XML model processing instruction to associate a relaxing schema or a schematron schema with a document was developed as a W3C note, which is, you know, something that says we do not enforce this, but if you are thinking of creating some mechanisms to associate the schema with a document, this is what you should use probably rather than invent your own. And we support that. So first draft of the SQF specification is available. It's published. I know how to pass this link information, maybe through Twitter. I can tweet that later. And the Schematron quick fixes are basically annotations for Schematron schema. In Schematron, any foreign namespace is an annotation. So then we have a Schematron quick fix namespace, and on a report or an assert, we can say SQF fix and specify an ID of a fix or multiple IDs. So you can refer one or more fixes. For some reason, my PDF viewer does not want to respond in a. Maybe I will close it if I can, because I have 2 updates on the App Store. Maybe that's why. Okay. And here it is how the fix is defined. So there is an SQF fix element. So it's a different namespace from Schematron and will be treated as an annotation. And that has as ID, it has this fix ID. And then there's a description with the title and additional information. And then we have the operation or operations that are invoked as part of that fix. And there are only 4 basic operations that you can use to add, delete, replace, and replace string. Replace string works with regular expressions, so you can do more I don't know, powerful while the replace operations is on XML structures, on nodes, on elements, and so on. Here's an example of adding an attribute. So this is the part that added the format attribute to the xref, to the link, right? So it has SQL add node type equals attribute, and then the name of the attribute. Here's the diagram from the schema. The replace operation has also, this is the part that converts an order list to an unordered list. Let me go through this. This is the delete operation that deleted the comment from title. So in the end, all those quick fixes that you've seen that I presented earlier are just one line for SQF, apart from the title and description, right? The actual part is just one line. And here's the string replace that replaces semicolon. So semicolon, and this symbol is for the end of the input, is replaced with a full stop. An interesting part is that you can place within an action, you can use XSLT. So if you have, let's say, if you want to add some fragment, the fragment in the add operation is not something static that you write in the Schematron file. You can write an XSLT, so you can use XPath, the context node being the node matched by that rule. So you can access with value of different attributes relative to the current node. So the fix will be dynamic based on what you have in the document and that context. So it's not, otherwise everything, all this will not work if you have to write in the Schematron schema the entire script. One issue here is with the formatting when you insert content. So you can use, if you really care about the exact formatting, you can use the XML space preserve, and that will be inserted exactly as that. Otherwise, oXygen will not format the content, but will indent the lines. So we will do when we insert fragment, we will perform a line indenting on that. We decided, I mean, when you have these quick fixes in text mode, if you do not indent the lines, then the user will have an extra step probably to fix that. But if you really care, or the space is really important for that fix, you can use XML space equals preserve, and you will get exactly that into the document. And so if you have element only content, the rules are exactly as in XSLT. No white space will be generated in the output. So you need to add new lines if you have element only content. If you have mixed content, then you will get also white space generated in the output. So that's why here it's an example that if you have something like this, everything will be on one line, right? In the fix, everything will go on one line. And if you want new lines, you need to add the new lines in with the XSLT text. But in general, if you do that in the author mode, maybe you really don't care about this being on one line or multiple lines. I don't know. but that the XML, the space in XML document, the white space, is always a very big issue. So we try to cover this and work similar to XSLT, because all these implementations are based in the end on XSLT. Schematron gets converted to an XSLT script. There is also another functionality, so you can refer multiple fixes, but you can disable some of them using useWhen. Because it may be easier, I think, sometimes to just refer these are possible fixes, but then one fix can say, oh, but I cannot be applied in this context. So instead of checking and having changing your assertions, let's say, and especially if you reuse the same fix for multiple assertions, right? You don't want to put this useWhen condition and modify your Schematron script. But this fix makes sense only in some cases, let's say. Then you can use useWhen to filter out the cases where that fix does not really make sense. Like here, I think it's an example where only if the semicolon is the last entry, I think it will be replaced. Although
the li is the last li. Sorry.
Context is li. Yes. Yeah, I know. Probably is not the best example here. Other elements in SQF are call fix, which allow you to basically from a if you have a fix that does some actions and the fix that needs to do something and then do that part, right? Instead of writing that again, you say call fix and then continue maybe adding other actions, right? SQF fixes groups multiple fixes together. This is used when you define global fixes. So they are also scoped. You can define them either in within a rule, I think, and then they will be within a pattern, I think, and then they will be local to that pattern. Or they may be globally defined and then they are visible to all patterns. There are a few elements in SQF that we do not support fully in oXygen. This SQF keep and SQF user entry. The most interesting part probably is user entry, where let's say when you want a fix, you may want to give the user the option to select something and then use that information for the fix. And here we discuss two ways of being able to implement this in oXygen, but basically the most advanced or the most comprehensive way of implementing that means when we validate with Schematron, we need to keep some XSLT code that represents the quick fix, and instead of getting the actual actions, we pass this script to oXygen, and only when we invoke the quick fix, we show the user entry dialog. You enter the data, we pass that as parameter back to the XSLT script, we run that, and then we obtain the actions, the actual code. So that's how we need to implement this to actually fully support user entry. So it's not very complicated, it's not very complex, but it can be done, but we didn't have time for that for 17. Along with this support, we also added development support for SQF. So we support editing SQL files embedded in Schematron with validation, content completion, XPath support, XPath content completion support. and it's also part of the search and refactoring. How
5 minutes.
So I don't know what happens because this benefits it's correctly spelled in my original open document. I regenerated it a couple of times. There is another slide where you may have noticed the I was missing. I have no clue why is that. So the benefits for SQF is that you can use the also the power of XSLT within them. They are not that complex, and we can think of these quick fixes also in a way they overlap with the refactoring part, right? But it will be interesting, but kind of difficult to apply quick fixes batch, right? Because once you apply the quick fix, the rest may not be valid anymore, so you need to revalidate the document. So it's not like you see here are 5 things that can be fixed and say, okay, fix all of them. Some of those may depend on the rest of the content, so you can apply only one and then see what fixes are available next, right? And I also want to say that Patrick did a lot of work on SQF, and he knows more than me on Schematron Quick Fixes. He basically extended this, reached the limits of the current language, and he extended the support that we have in oXygen by overwriting basically the style sheets that the default style sheets that we provide. Another interesting part is that SQF Schematron Quick Fixes are not useful only for DITA or TI or DocBook or other documents, but they can be very useful also for XSLT. So applying, validating an XSLT document, an XSLT script with Schematron, you can identify, let's say you want all parameters to be typed. So you require the as attribute on all parameters, right? Because that's what you want for your scripts. So then you can write a Schematron rule, identify and those problems, and provide a quick fix to add the as attribute, or you may also infer the value of that type for that parameter, right? Because if you have a call template, a call template to the parameter that has the type string, right? When you and you don't have the type on the template parameter, you can infer that it's a string. So and so on. We added the Schematron quick fixes to the data support in oXygen, so there are already a number of quick fixes when you edit data documents. We use it for our user guide, which is a project. We made the user guide available on GitHub, so it's an open source project basically. We still develop the new functionality on a private Git repository, and then we push all the changes to the public one when we make an oXygen release. So they are available, but after, being a commercial tool, we cannot develop everything as an open source or GitHub. And then there's this dynamic information model, which is an intelligent style guide that encodes Schematron rules as data. And I have an XSLT script that can generate the Schematron code from the style guide itself. And that also has quick fixes added to it. And Alex showed that the guys from the TI community like this a lot, and they already created a couple of quick fixes and put them on the TIC website. Itzkali is the engine that Nico developed originally, I mean, it's still developed by Nico, but it's the first engine that implemented Schematron Quick Fixes. It's an open source project. I'm not sure if it's the source is available or not right now. But anyway, Nico wants to have that available as far as I know. And there's a command line tool for that and the plugin for oXygen. So if Alex will allow me 5 minutes.
Just take your time.
So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Can you automatically apply all the quick fixes in one go by default?
No, exactly, because as I said, if you apply one quick fix, you change the document, and the others may not be valid. We don't have a way to know, if this fix, if one of these fixes that are reported for this problem is applied, then this is still valid or not.
Okay, so they need to be applied one after the other.
Yep.
Can you apply them one after the other until the document is completely fixed?
Yeah, that's
without user interaction.
That's a user request. That's a feature request that we are thinking to implement. Like apply all fixes, but that will not be like the all that you see now. But apply fixes until there are no fixes available.
How do you choose what fix to do if you've got a choice of fixes?
Yeah, that's another problem. You will that's another issue with this. So quick fixes, as I see them, are for interactive use, basically, not for batch. For that, you create refactoring actions and apply them to fix those problems.
I mean, I can see it going both ways, to be honest, because there are some things that you really need somebody to have the human intelligence to decide how to fix the problem. But we have hundreds of scheme formulas running on XML that we get back from Indian typesetters. And a lot of them could be automated very easily. So there's a wide selection of use cases, even within just our scheme from. I'd like to see something where automated fixes would save a lot of time and money. But other things we wouldn't want to.
Maybe the rule specifies one of those.
I wonder, what
Yeah.
I'm working my way towards saying is I wonder whether that's something that needs to go into the SQF.
Yeah, so get involved, open this issue, and either, so this may be that you can apply all fixes that have only one solution. That can be done probably, or you can mark a fix, that this can be applied automatically or something like that, and then you know which ones the Schematron developer intending to be applied automatically or not.
But you can also implement a quick fix that fixes more than the actual error. For instance, I have a quick fix that adds a missing attribute, and if I add another quick fix that adds all missing attributes in the whole document of this type. And so that's very simple and can be implemented with a given framework.
Yes?
Yeah, this is more like a SQF question and oXygen question, but is it possible to keep the Schematron rules and the fixes in separate documents?
Yes. Yes.
You can import the fixes into the Schematron file. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think if you use the import in Schematron works not as you will normally expect but it just is like an XI include. So it just brings that element in.
Yeah.
So if you have a document that has quick fixes, so SQF quick fixes and all the fixes there, then you can use Schematron include to bring exactly that annotation in the Schematron file. And this is how it is done, I think, in the DIM project. So oXygen XML, github.com/oXygen XML/DIM. And there's a library there, and the quick fixes are in a separate file.
So you still need something in the Schematron rule itself to say which quick fix is applicable there, don't you?
Yes.
You can't do it the other way around. You can't have a quick fix file and say, this is for this Schematron, I believe.
That will be interesting probably, because you can have IDs on Schematron patterns. so you can link also the other way around, and in that way basically you can provide the quick fix without any change to the Schematron file. You know.
That's not something that's been implemented yet,
No.
though.
No, so it works. You need to change the Schematron file to add these annotations to point to the fix. But that's an interesting idea from the point of view that, you know, I may not want to change these files.
Well, they might not be your Schematron files to change. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so hope you like these ideas and what they can bring. So we'll try further also to improve existing frameworks, existing you know, to provide this and take advantage of this functionality. So thank you.